We have a very healthy prosecutor.
I'll read this part.
Okay.
And then maybe let you jump in there.
Okay.
That seemed like, did we do that last time?
Yeah, we did.
Are you comfortable?
Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah. So.
If we can, we'll go ahead and bring this meeting to order. Our tentative time is 5:15, and we're a couple minutes after, so we'll go ahead and get started. This is the October 12th, 2017 meeting of the Jefferson City Planning and Zoning Commission. My name is Chris Jordan. I'm the chairman of this commission. I would like to remind our commission members to please turn your microphones on when you're speaking, as well as anyone here today, including commission members and staff, to silence any electronic devices that you may have. With that, we will start with introductions, and I think we have Ms. Wiseman here to start off.
My name's Erin Wiseman. I'm a 3rd Ward representative.
Michelle Mahoney.
Bunny Tricky Cotton. Jack Deacon.
Ann Stropman, city staff.
Chris Yarnell. Dale Vaughn.
Blake Marcus.
Eric Barron, city staff.
Alex Rotenberry, city staff.
Sonny Sanders, city staff.
All right. The procedural matters, the city code authorizes 9 regular members and 3 alternates. Alternates are designated to vote upon the absence or disqualification of a regular member. A quorum of 5 members or alternates is necessary to conduct business. I do believe we will have quorum tonight, so if Miss Ann will go through and let us know who we've got tonight.
Okay. Those absent are Dean Dutoy, Bob George, Michael Lester, David Nunn, Matthew Hall, and Michelle Mahoney. So those able to vote tonight, Michelle, sorry. Yes, and then just Matthew Hall. And then those voting would be Bunny Tricky Cotton, Jack Deacon, Dale Vaughn, Chris Yarnell, Blake Marcus, and Michelle Mahoney.
All right. Are there any commission members who will be disqualifying themselves from any agenda item or anything to vote on this evening? So seeing none, the voting members will be, as Ann said, Bunny Tricky Cotton, Jack Deacon, Dale Vaughn, Chris Yarnell, Blake Marcus, and Michelle Mahoney. I do know, we do know that Mr. Nunn may be arriving a little bit late, so he may be voting on some of those items, but we'll deal with that if he makes it yet tonight. Next, we'll have a call for cases. We have 2 cases this evening. We have case number P17019, 1310 Edgewood Drive. It is an amendment to a final PUD plan. Is there someone here to represent that? And if you would, just please raise your hand. Thank you. Our next is case P17020, zoning code text amendment pertaining to short-term rentals. I believe city staff will be doing that.
That is correct.
Great. Thank you. Is there any reason for any continuances this evening?
No, there is not.
Thank you, sir. Is there any reason to reorder the agenda this evening?
No, sir.
Thank you. If you would, I believe, Eric, you're going to read the hearing and order of testimony?
Or Alex, you know.
I'm sorry, Alex. I looked right at you and said, I told you I was going to do that.
Yeah, you did. You did warn me.
Yes. Alex, please.
Okay, thank you. I would like to briefly describe the procedures of the commission. The proceedings of the meeting are being recorded, so I'll ask that when you speak, please step to the microphone, giving your name and address for the record. After a brief introduction by city staff, the applicant and applicant's consultants and advisors will explain the project. The opening presentation by the applicant shall be limited to 10 minutes. The applicant shall be given 3 additional minutes for closing testimony if the applicant so requests. We will ask to hear from supporters of the request. We will ask to hear from any opponents of the request. We will ask to hear from anyone else who wishes to speak on the request. Testimony from supporters, opponents, and other interested parties shall be limited to 3 minutes each. Rebuttal testimony shall be limited to 5 minutes unless permission shall be granted by the Commission for additional time. City staff will describe the proposal and make their recommendations on the request. in order to reduce the time necessary to hear an application, reference to printed material, including staff reports, applicable findings, ordinances, and/or statutes shall not be read into the record unless directed by the Commission. Staff reports and recommendations, if any, on any matter before the Commission shall be presented to the Commission before the Commission acts on the matter. The Commission will close testimony from the floor. Prior to the motion or discussion on the case, the Commission will then discuss the proposal, then publicly make its determination with reasons. The form of the motion shall be positive. That is, the motion shall be made to accept the request as presented or with modifications, stipulations, or conditions. A final vote will then be taken. Ayes in favor, nays opposed. The chairman shall announce the results of the vote, specifying the number of votes cast in favor and the number of votes cast against. The following documents are entered as exhibits for all items under consideration at this meeting: chapters of the City Code as amended, the Comprehensive Plan and Land Use Map, copies of applications under consideration, a list of property owners to whom notices were sent, the affidavit of publication of the public notice in the newspaper, copies of drawings, plans, and/or renderings under consideration, letters or memoranda from staff, staff reports, meetings of proceedings, letters, photos, memoranda, or other materials submitted by the public or the applicant, the rules of procedure for the City of Jefferson, Missouri Planning and Zoning Commission. These items are public record and are available for inspection in the Department of Planning and Protective Services or through the Office of the City Clerk. Please be advised that any and all items presented, distributed, circulated, or otherwise received pertaining to the cases under consideration become the property of the Commission. This includes photographs, drawings, renderings, petitions, and letters. And that's it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Alex. I might mention to the commission members in the audience that Alex is doing a little cross-training this evening. In case that one of our staff members can't make it, that we have two people in City Hall that could share the duties or whatnot. So please bear with Alex and myself this evening as we try to weed through the things that we need to. Next, we will move on to the adoption of the agenda. So when the commission members are ready, we will entertain a motion.
To approve the adoption of the agenda as presented.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carries. Next, we have the approval of the minutes. Miss Ann was nice enough to provide those to us for our regular meeting last September 14th. You have those before you, so when you're ready, we'll entertain the motion again.
Minutes as presented from the September meeting.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Communications, I believe just a few minutes ago we received a letter of communication from the Jefferson City Board of Realtors that was distributed to city staff as well as the commission members tonight. It is in regards to the demolition proposal that is under other business on our agenda tonight. Eric and Alex, I don't believe there's any reason that we need to read that out loud, just to note that it has been submitted to city staff. Is that correct?
I think that's correct. It is another business for discussion only item on the agenda,
Okay.
and so should have plenty of time to read its contents and take that in consideration.
Very good. I'm sure that the Jeff City Board of Realtors will be interested in what we're doing on that, and we'll get some correspondence back to them going forward. Next, we will move on to our new business. I think Alex is going to present this case, but it is case number P17019, Edgewood Drive. It is an amendment to a final PUD plan. It was submitted by the Capital Region Medical Center. They are the property owners on behalf of St. Nicholas Academy. They are asking for an amendment to a final PUD plan to add boarding schools as a permitted use of the property. Alex, if you would like to tell us a little bit about it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I just want to go ahead and start by giving you guys a location and describing where it is. The property, and actually the property just to the north of that, which is not highlighted, are both under consideration this evening. But just to orient you, to the right-hand side of the map there, running north-south, is Southwest Boulevard. The street north of that of the properties we're talking about this evening is Stadium Boulevard. So just a little bit south of Stadium and a little bit west of Southwest Boulevard along Edgewood Drive. It's actually at the northwest corner of Memorial and Edgewood, to get more specific. The zoning of the property, it is actually surrounded on all sides by PUD, which is planned unit development. That's really it. The history of the property is that it was actually zoned PUD back in 1989. The original use for the property was for a child daycare center, and so that at that time in 1989 it was zoned that way, and that was the use that was associated with the PUD. So just a little bit about what's being asked for this evening. The applicants have requested that a boarding school use being used for this property, and that it being zoned PUD is coming before this body in order to make that change to the PUD plan. So, I don't know, is that? Yep, I think that's about all I really have to say about it. Yeah, the applicants may have more to add than I do. So.
All right. Thank you, Alex. Do any of the commission members have any questions for Alex or other city staff at this point? Alex, I have one question for you, maybe for a definition of what a boarding school is, just so that all the commission members, including myself, are kind of familiar with what that means and what the use might be allowed in that building.
Just give us 1 second here.
Sure.
The reason that we're calling it a boarding school is that a boarding school is listed within the zoning matrix as one of the identified land uses. So it's something that's tied to the zoning matrix. The actual operation of what they would be doing in the building, and I kind of leave it to the applicant to go into the details of that. But it's not necessarily having the educational component of that on the property, but to have the boarding part, the children staying in the building located on the property. And so we're calling it a boarding school, although it's very residential in nature. So.
Thank you, Eric. Do any other commission members have any questions for city staff at this point? Okay, if not, would someone like to come up and present this case this evening? If you would, please come up and state your name and address for the record, and let us know a little bit about what you got.
Hi, my name is Martin Grabansky. I'm Director of Facilities for Capital Region Medical Center, the owner of the property at 1310 Edgewood. It's our wish to have the zoning amended to allow the opportunity for early child development for our leasee, who is here, St. Nicholas Academy. That's my function because we own the property. We had to initiate the request. So, any questions of me?
Any questions of Martin at this point from the commissioners? Thank you, sir.
Little intimidating little microphone here. My name is Elizabeth Huber. I live at 3705 Fairway Drive in Jefferson City. Some of you may know me from Huber and Associates, where We've been in business for 31 years, but tonight I'm here representing the St. Nicholas Academy because I'm president of the Academy. We've recently established this 501c3 corporation as a boarding school and recently got approved by the IRS to do that, and I wanted to publicly thank Martin and Capital Region Medical Center for supporting us on this project. It is interesting when people ask about a boarding school, and this particular piece of property will be the boarding piece of the boarding school, as we will be modifying the building to handle housing children. Roughly right now we're working with the architect here in town, Matt Reimiller, to design the layout with a few modifications to the existing daycare center, but it actually will be quite easy to modify it to be a overnight care, so a residential. And the school piece of it will be through a partnership with local schools, and in particular we are starting with St. Peter's Parochial, Interparish Parochial School, Catholic school here in town, to partner and kind of outsource the education piece. So the idea is to take in children who we typically think of a boarding school more for wealthy people who send their children to get prepped for college, for example. But in this case, the idea is the same, is to prepare children for future life, but it is for people who cannot afford the home life that is required to allow children to succeed. So sadly, we have children like that in Jefferson City, and we are looking to provide them a facility where their parents can enroll them for free in the St. Nicholas Academy, and then they will be taken care of, fed, cared for, housed, and then with a cooperative venture with St. Peter's School, educated. So I'm hoping that makes sense as to what we're endeavoring to do, and very excited to get it started and to start work on the property to make it ready to handle some kids.
Thank you. Do any of the commission members have any questions? Jack, go ahead.
How many children do you look for to have their, I mean, at the maximum?
At the maximum. Right now, I'm working with the architect to lay it out, but we're kind of thinking 12.
Okay. And where are the children coming from? Are they referral from, or they have to come and apply, or?
They will have to apply. These are great questions. I'm basing this boarding school off of the Milton Hershey School back in Hershey, Pennsylvania, which is a boarding school for underprivileged children. And the families have to apply to get them in. They have to prove that they do not have economic means, for example, to normally to go to an expensive boarding school. And then they apply, and if they are accepted, they move into the boarding school and live there most of the year. They do go home at different times.
How many adults per child will be living there full time? And are they same people will just live in with them, or will there be rotating staff? I got 100 questions. I'll just leave it just a couple.
Well, it will be thousands of questions but I am basing it on the Milton Hershey School, and their whole setup is with house parents. So you have house parents living there full time. So part of the renovation will be to provide a living area for the children and also a living area for the house parents. It's a pretty good sized building with each floor having 4,600 square feet, so we think we can get all that done. And there will also be another area for relief parents, for example, when the house parents need a break, which we all know. I wish I'd been paid to raise my children and then get a break from time to time, but that's the layout. So we'll have house parents living there and then relief parents, and plus there will be a director of the facility and a lot of volunteer staff as well.
I should have only asked one at a time. And how many children per parent?
There will be 2 living there full time.
Okay, for the 12 children.
For up to 12 children. My goal is to start within the next year with just 1, 2, or 3.
What age group is it?
Milton Hershey School takes kids from the age of 4 all the way up through 16.
Okay.
We are focusing more on kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade, but then to keep them and grow them up. But that would be, it's easier to get them acclimated to a change such as this if you start at an early age. So, great questions. Any others?
Any other questions for Elizabeth at this point? Thank you. Appreciate that.
One more. I assume you have your brother-in-law's permission to be in his backyard?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you made a point. This building is sandwiched between Huber and Associates building just to I guess the south, and my brother-in-law's to the north. Yeah. Other questions?
Do you see most of these, your students, children coming from the local community?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. This is to benefit Jefferson City families. Anything else? Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Is there anyone else that would like to speak regarding the case as far as directly being involved with that? Okay, if not, we will move on. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak in favor of this request? If you would, please come forward and state your name and address for the record. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak in opposition to this request? If so, please come forward and state your name and address for the record. Lastly, is there anyone who would just like to speak on this request? Please come forward and state your name and address for the record. Seeing none. At this point, we will close public testimony. Alex, do you have a staff report for us?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the staff analysis, the existing PU plan for the property already includes the child daycare as a permitted use. The St. Nicholas Academy envisions the facility housing up to 12 children and house parents. The children would attend local area schools, with the facility on Edgewood Drive being primarily for boarding purposes. So, the staff recommend approval of the proposed PUD plan amendment. The proposed boarding school use would not be a significant change to the previous daycare use or be substantially out of character with the area. And additionally, staff recommend establishing an underlying zoning of CO to accommodate any future uses of the property, as well as for signage and lighting standards.
All right, Alex, thank you. So I'm assuming from what you're saying there that the underlying zoning of CO would accommodate things going forward for this property if they would come into City Hall, and the use that they would ask for would fit under CO. They would no longer come back to this body. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe that's correct.
Okay. All right. With that, I will ask the commissioners if they have any questions for any of city staff at this point. Okay. If there's no more questions, we will entertain a motion. I think city staff mentioned that motion should be favorable, and then we will decide a vote from there.
Move to approve of the PUD plan amendment to add the boarding school as permitted use for the property and establish an underlying zoning of CO for the purpose of determining future permitted uses such as signage and lighting.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion carries. Alex, this will go where next? Does it go to the City Council? And if so, what's the dates on that?
All right, so we'll be going before the City Council for a public hearing on November the 20th at 6 p.m. in this room right here.
All right. Well, very good. Thank you all for your testimony this evening, and I'm sure city staff will be in touch.
Thank you.
Our next case this evening is case P17020, zoning code text amendment pertaining to short-term rentals. This request was filed by city staff regarding the Chapter 35 zoning. I think, didn't we work on this a little bit last month, Eric?
Yes, it was presented as a discussion item last month, as is our custom here before the Planning and Zoning Commission, of having them up for discussion before bringing them forward for a formal public hearing.
Okay, well, I'll let you run off and tell us a little bit more about it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as mentioned, we did discuss this last month. It is a staff-initiated request to amend the zoning code in order to in order to incorporate short-term rentals into the zoning code. And so up on the screen I have a bit of an outline on what the zoning code text amendment would consist of. I also have copies of it within your paper, and then copies up on the podium there. But and so in essence, this text amendment would accomplish four things. First, it would define short-term rentals. And so, what is a short-term rental? Well, it's really, largely dealing with rental of residential units or parts of residential units. And so it's separated between the rental of an entire residence, typically an entire residential home, but it could potentially be a single unit within a multi-unit residential building. And then, separated from that would be rental of a single room within a residence. Okay, with the advent of with the internet becoming a more common feature of people's lives and planning out their destinations and such, what various websites have really targeted and it's become very easy for property owners to list residences on the internet for rental. So this text amendment is attempting to deal with that type of activity. And so second bullet point there is to establish these uses as a special exception use in residential districts. And then the third bullet point is to establish them as a permitted use within the commercial districts. And then the last item there is establishing some specific use standards, some special requirements that are applicable to this use. And I'll go through each one of those points through the course of the presentation. So we have made a few changes to the proposed ordinance from what was presented last month, and I'll try to highlight those as I go through the presentation on what was changed. Again, changed largely due to the discussion that took place at the last meeting. Okay, first, the definitions. And so the top half of the screen there is an excerpt from the proposed bill that's within your packets, defining a short-term rental of a residence, meaning the entire house, and a short-term rental of a lodging room, typically either a room or it might be a basement or a portion of a house that's being offered for rent. Again, typically this would be for a very short period measured in just days, but we crafted the definition to be anything less than 1 month. We felt that was necessary in order to provide a clear separation between what a long-term residence is and what a short-term residence is. So then we also inserted a definition for long-term residence. It was lacking in the zoning code, but define a long-term residence as residence within a dwelling unit for a period of 1 month or more. And then the fourth definition there is a very small amendment to the definition of a hotel in order to make sure it's differentiated from these short-term rentals of residences. And then I included the bed and breakfast definitions there at the bottom. They're not included in the code amendment because they're not being touched. But again, this short-term rentals are differentiated from hotels and bed and breakfast. So, want to stress that the two, there's a pretty clear division between those two, where short-term rental of a residence is actually a unit that's being used for residential purposes today, and someone's wanting to rent it out on a short-term basis. Whereas bed and breakfast businesses and hotels, even retreat centers, really fall into a commercial category type of use. So the next slide here is the land use matrix that is proposed within the bill. We've listed these both short-term rental of a residence and short-term rental of a lodging room as separate items within the matrix, but basically have the same spread of districts on where there are either permitted or special exceptions for those two uses. And that there would be a special exception in every category except for the commercial districts and the mixed-use districts. So I think I have a laser pointer here. So this right here. So would establish it as being permitted outright within those 4 commercial districts and the mixed-use district, and a special exception everywhere else. So what that means is, the majority of these tend to occur in single-family districts. It's someone looking to rent a single-family home out on a short-term basis. So they would be required to apply for and receive a special exception permit in order to conduct that activity in that residential district. So they would come in front of the Planning and Zoning Commission and then also onto the City Council in order to go through that very public process and in order to achieve the ability to use their property in that way. It's very public. It involves notification of surrounding property owners and posting a sign on the property, the same as any other zoning case that comes before this body. And so it establishes a very public process for when those uses would be located in residential districts, and also in the very rare instance where a home, a residentially used home, is located within a manufacturing or industrial district. There are very few of those in town. But for the commercial districts, it would be identified as a permitted use. There are several residential areas that are zoned commercial, typically located near existing commercial areas. Also, the downtown with the downtown lofts would be eligible to rent out those lofts on a short-term basis outright without having to go through a special exception process. The third slide I have here is a fairly lengthy spread there, identifying the different special requirements or specific use standards that are proposed to be put in place for this. And I think I went through them in detail at the last meeting. I'll try to go down it again. I wanted to mention that there's one thing that was removed from the last meeting. We had something inserted in there regarding a maximum number of days of stay. And listed it at 7 days. We've removed that, and so there's really no limit. It's either 30. If it's less than 30 days, it falls into the short-term category. If it's more than 30 days, then they're renting it long-term, and this whole thing does not apply. So I wanted to mention that. That was an item of discussion at the last meeting. But first, item 1, that special exception permits, where required, would be issued in the name of the property owner. And so that does 2 things. It's if the property owner has any type of history of not maintaining their property, that would typically be known and can be taken into account through this public process. Also, if the property is sold, transferred to someone else, that new owner would have to go through the process again in order to receive a new special exception permit. Second item, that use of accessory structures as rentals would not be permitted. So garages or other things that are located in the backyard or anything could not be converted into lodging and rented out for this purpose. The number of guests is really tied to, in the case of renting an entire home, tied to the same definition as a family, which can be pretty broad. But for the rental of a single room within a home, tied to a maximum of 4 people. And the reason for that is to make sure that someone renting out just a small portion of their home does not have an influx of a massive number of people. Number 4, that signage would be fairly limited, would be limited to a single small sign of 1 square foot, just enough to let the people know that they're in the correct location. Again, these are not commercial uses. This is a residential type of use that's being rented out on a short-term basis. Number 5, that parties and receptions would not be permitted, so you couldn't rent one of these for the purpose of hosting a party or gathering. Number 6 is some information dealing with parking. For the rental of an entire house or residence, essentially there's no impact on parking. The parking that would normally be associated with that residence would accommodate the rental. But in case of renting out a single room within a residence, it's important to make sure that that property can accommodate the additional car. So where a typical house only requires 2 cars, if you're renting out a part of a residence, then you need at least 3 parking spots. Number 7, that the property needs to maintain its residential appearance. Again, these are residential uses, not commercial. Number 8, that this type of use would be subject to any applicable taxes and licensing requirements. So if the lodging tax is applicable to this, then they would, of course, be required to adhere to that. And also, if there's business licensing requirements that are applicable, they'd be required to adhere to that. And then the last item there, number 9, is that this use would be subject to any building and fire code requirements and inspections, if necessary, in order to make sure that the items being rented out are adhering to those codes. I think that was my overview for the proposal. I'll jump ahead a bit to timeline. Especially in regards to number 8 on this list, applicable taxes. I believe and licensing requirements. I believe that there is some discussion among city staff about proposing code amendments to clarify where this type of use would fall with respect to licensing and lodging tax requirements. And so as that's being prepared, we would hold this proposal after going through this body before presenting it to the city council until probably December. So instead of sending it there next month, we'd hold it back a month just so that it could appear in front of the council at the same time as those other amendments that deal with the same topic, just not the land use component of it. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions the commissioners may have. Again, it's a public hearing, and so anyone can, or the purpose of the meeting tonight with regards to this is to seek any public comment that there might be on it.
All right. Thank you, Eric. Do any of the commissioners have any questions for Eric or other city staff?
We do. Eric, can you help? Can we go through, no, back up to your previous one, please, right there. Number 2. Can we talk about that for just, why are you saying that? What's the purpose?
For accessory structures. So there is a requirement of the city code that you cannot locate 2 residences on a single property in a single family zoning district. And so to give a more clear example of that, things such as mother-in-law quarters are not permitted by the Jefferson City zoning code. Okay, and so just want to make sure that it's clear to anyone who is looking at pursuing this type of use that they cannot create a second livable unit on their property. It probably does not even need to be in there because, as I mentioned, a second residence on a property is not permitted, but want to make sure that it's clear that the conversion of a secondary structure or construction of a secondary structure for the purpose of renting it out on a short-term basis would not be permitted by this section of the code. So, did that answer your question? We want to make sure people don't build second houses on their single-family lots under the guise of it being a short-term rental.
And I don't know if this exists, but I could see a situation where I had a garage that I had I was thinking an office and a bathroom or something similar. It's not truly it's not another residence, it's just an extension of my property. Mm-hmm. And that's where I was headed. I understand I think at some point we're going to get to that mother-in-law structure, and we're not there yet.
Yes, and it is a topic that comes up amongst other cities, and we, at the staff level, pay attention to that. And so it is an ongoing topic in other cities. And so yes, it very easily could be something that we could take a harder look at. Of course, you could certainly send us in that direction as well, as the Planning and Zoning Commission. But we just wanted to make sure with this section we're not granting that right to anyone to do something that is not otherwise not permitted in outside of the short-term rental. So.
Okay, but if I've got in my garage, I have put a bathroom, and maybe I can't do this, maybe that's the problem, but I can see this coming up. If I have an existing bathroom and an office or whatever.
Den.
I was thinking a man
Man
cave.
cave, but a she shed.
Yeah, a she shed. Because it's in the garage, it's a she shed.
Right.
I'll get in trouble for that one. Does that qualify?
Well, no. The city code does not allow for, again, this is the rental of a residence or part of a residence, and the city code does not allow for a second residence to be located on a single-family property. And so it never qualified as a residence, not legally. And so coming in to seek approval to use it as a residence, it would not be permitted by the existing code, and we would want to make sure that we're not, opening the door for something by this amendment.
On that same subject, I know there's a number of places. Actually, the last residence I came from, there was a detached garage that had already been converted to a nice bedroom. I mean, my older children loved it out there, and so that would not necessarily be a residence, but would it not be part of a bedroom? I mean, just renting out a bedroom? And I know a couple tree houses that are probably better than that were set up. So, I mean, I had problem with that same thing in there, because I know a lot of garages, almost attached garages, but the up above part was converted into small bedrooms and lofts and stuff. So, I mean, you get...
Yeah, and so I think my response to the two comments would really be that if our city code or zoning code dealt with items such as mother-in-law quarters or accessory dwelling units, is I believe the term amongst the city planners, differently, then I would have a different staff level stance on that. But as it is not permitted today, that it really can't permit it through that. And so, again, don't think we want to open the door for someone being able to do that whenever it's not permitted as an accessory dwelling unit today. And I would hope that would be a rare case. It is possible that if we pursue other code amendments in the future regarding accessory dwelling units, then we could take another look at this as well. So.
Go ahead.
Jack, so I think what he's saying is all those places that you and I are discussing probably aren't legal.
Well, there's a lot of stuff, yeah.
I-
forgiveness,
I know where there's a number of them.
What is the penalty for violating the current code by having one of these, an Airbnb rental? And then what would be the penalty for violating the new code if we were to pass this?
Yeah, and that's where I wish the attorneys were here. It's general code violation. I have to go. It's no different than any other zoning code violation.
Okay.
So.
Do you know if that's a misdemeanor, an infraction, a penalty, a fine? My only concern here is that you've got some of these things that are clearly, if I go and have an accessory structure to my house, that's something that I did affirmatively. But if I rent out my house to somebody who ends up having a party on it or does a wedding or a reception or something like that, that's not necessarily something I can control. So my concern would be, what's the penalty if this is violated? Am I am I subject to a criminal act because, or a criminal violation because of something that my guest did?
Well, without getting into the details on the penalty, I think I can still answer the question. Yes, as the property owner, you're responsible for the use of the property. And so if it's being used improperly, then yes, you are responsible for that. Now, if they're violating other laws, if you guess, or, violating noise ordinance or other, criminal types of actions, obviously there's other ways to deal with that. But as a land use matter, that would you're responsible for that. What would typically be done? Well, violating that would be that would be one cause to seek a revocation of the special exception permit. And so that would probably be the course of action, is if that was something that occurred or regularly occurred, then it could be brought up for revocation.
Eric, do you feel that that's some of the stuff that the city staff is going to be working on between tonight's meeting and moving it to city council, where the actions that Blake's asking about, first time it's a warning, or the second time you're back before planning and zoning, the third time you go see a judge or whatever, is that where you feel that will be the things that will be answered between now and city council action?
Well, I think I think it would be dealt with, that there's no necessary process that we'd have to establish between now and city council. It would be dealt with as the director of the department has the authority to deal with those issues in various manners as outlined within the zoning code. There's several different options. But it's largely a case-by-case basis depending on the details and severity of the issue. So,
Blake, are you comfortable with that for now? Okay. Dale, you have something?
What's a party? Is that is that considered the cops being called on you, or how do you just how is that considered? Would it be somebody would have to complain? The cops would have to be called. Is that what would be? Because a party could be between two people. It could be one person, right? Mm-hmm. Noise violation.
So I think the two things that typically come up with a party is an excessive number of vehicles parking there, and an excessive amount of noise and activity that is out of character with the residential area. So,
probably based on complaints, probably too.
And complaints, yes.
The other question I have is, as far as building codes and fire codes, how would that affect the property being used as Airbnb? Would everything have to be, because there's a lot of properties that are grandfathered in, they're not up to building code standards today, mm-hmm. Or up to fire code. Give me an example of what would happen.
Well, I tend to defer to the building official and to the fire department, when touching on those subjects. And it's one of those things that doesn't even necessarily need to be listed within the zoning code, because every building has to comply with applicable building code and fire code requirements. Now, those buildings fall into various states of being grandfathered, for lack of a better term. My understanding is that the main thing that they would be looking for here is to make sure there's fire or smoke detectors, carbon monoxide alarm, and more than one way out of a room. And in other words, not necessarily, if the building complies with the building code, was not built illegally, okay, then it should be eligible to be used as a short-term, rental of a residence, assuming it has these very basic safety features. If the building was, has some illegal type of, something that was constructed not properly, use the term illegal, then that could be an issue for them, and that they would have to resolve before being able to pass that inspection, as with any building in town and any type of business or use.
So during the process, they would have to come in front of planning and zoning?
Correct.
Okay. And then they would submit their application, and then after that they would have a building inspector and fire inspector go out to the property and look at it?
So typically, those inspections don't occur. They would occur again. They occur for businesses all over town. Every business that applies for a business license is subject to these same inspections. And so this would just kind of be sending that inspection to the residential component. And so it is a separate process from land use approval, though. So they don't necessarily have to pass that inspection in order to come in front of this body and get their land use permit, their special exception permit. So really the details regarding the building code and fire code requirements are really not an item for the Planning and Zoning Commission to have as consideration. If approved for that use, they still have to pass those inspections. And so a classic example would be if they know that they have to do some sort of construction project in order to achieve this, they obviously would not want to do that until after they have their land use approval. So.
Thank you.
Is there a concern that the process itself, as well as the restrictions, are so onerous that people won't actually do this and they'll just continue to rent things illegally?
It could be an ongoing enforcement type of requirement and education among city staff. But it is, and one thing I didn't touch on, but it is written in there that the listing of the property or offering of it for rent is the trigger that identifies a violation. And so, city staff need only go on to, the internet or the newspaper ads or wherever that the residence is being offered, listed for short-term residence rental, to identify properties that are not in compliance. And so, yeah, that would be a case where they would likely receive a notice, a letter from city staff saying that you need to do this or stop listing it. And if they do not comply, then yes, it falls into an enforcement action. So,
and I guess just my follow-up to that would be if it gets to the point where there aren't that many people doing it, but the city staff is having to constantly send out these letters, and another event like an eclipse or maybe Mizzou football actually gets good, and people start renting out their homes for games, is there the willingness on the city staff's part to revisit some of these restrictions in the process later on?
I think so. It's, this is kind of a new area. Cities across the country are having to deal with this. I think they're dealing with it in possibly a number of different ways. I believe the most recommended way, and there's a nice reading that was included in your packet, a little article about things to consider when dealing with short-term rentals that was in your packet last month, and that was we followed that quite closely when drafting this, and so we think we've put together something pretty good. Is it perfect? Likely not. It very well could need amendment in the future, but we'll have a better idea of the issues in the future than we do right now. And so for right now, to put this process in place to allow them, their process to become an allowed use, while still protecting the surrounding neighborhood from what is often viewed as a commercial type of use. So, but yes, I fully intend there to be future code amendments dealing with this topic. It's hard to imagine there not being.
Eric, I have three quick things for you on this. One is going back to the comment about the accessory structures. I think it's great to put it out there for the applicants to be able to see it. It specifically states that, but one of the things that we've found over the years, if we reference that going through the zoning code, and then let's say 5 years from now we start talking about accessory buildings and we make an amendment there and you forget that statement is in this section, it gets left in there. So I just wanted you to maybe think about that going forward. If you already say the zoning code addresses these accessory structures, maybe we don't need to restate it within this specific use. Does that make sense?
I can understand.
I like it from the general public being able to read it and say, well, I can't use my garage, but I think that would be more of something for city staff as you all give them the application and work with them of what you can and can't do before they get here. But I just worry that we'll forget about that if we do something with accessory uses later on. My next thing would be, the second out of three would be, you mentioned that they could have some signage, and you talked about signage, being so people knew where this property might be. Having history, a lot of the home occupations that were approved from the city in previous years was a placard or something that was affixed to the building. What I don't want to see possibly, and maybe that's what you guys want to see, is yard signs. Somebody going, getting a sign, sticking it in their yard and saying, hey, here's my rental. I think that detracts from what we're trying to do here as a residential neighborhood, instead of having a sign out there all the time that says, hey, I'm for rent, for whatever their terms are. So I don't know if that signage should be that it's, maybe something that's affixed to the property or so on and so forth.
It does say that.
Okay, so thank you. The next one would be, and once again, going back to keeping residential in nature, you said something about requiring more parking. If someone, let's say myself, were renting out a room in my property, you were saying that you would require an additional parking stall. Is that additional parking stall, can that be, let's just say, in my residence, I have an attached garage. Was that additional parking, would that be in tandem? So if two cars were in the attached garage and there's two spots on the driveway, does that get you where you need to be? Or once again, would I have to go and pave a parking stall on my property somewhere?
We do, at the staff level, interpret the tandem or the driveway that's capable of having two cars as counting as two spots. And then typically the third spot would be out on the street, and the code allows for a spot to be counted out on the street for a residence. So my interpretation would be that a driveway capable of storing two vehicles and then one on the street would meet that requirement. There are a lot of properties in the city that are not that do not have driveways or do not have driveways capable of accommodating two cars. Those are the ones where it could be an issue. So.
Okay. Thank you. Is there any other questions from the commissioners for city staff? If not, we will open it up for the public. Okay, seeing none. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak in favor of this request? If so, please come forward and state your name and address for the record. Seeing none. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak in opposition to this request? If so, please come forward and state your name and address for the record. Seeing none. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to just speak on this request? Please come forward and state your name and address for the record. Seeing none. At this point, I will close public testimony. Eric, we'll move to your staff report.
It's very short. I think I've given a pretty good overview of it. The staff recommendation is for approval. I don't believe I mentioned that anywhere within the staff report documents, but just a motion for approval. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any other questions.
All right, thank you, Eric. Do any of the commissioners have any questions for Eric? If not, we will entertain a motion.
I make a motion to approve the zoning code text amendment pertaining to short-term rental.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carries. We are going, you said maybe December to the City Council?
Yes, and so being as this case did not require any property notifications or anything like that, we are a little bit free to send it to the City Council when it's best suited, and so we'll hold it so that it can be paired up with any other legislation that's being sent on a similar matter and move it forward then. I believe the plan is to have it introduced at the first meeting in December with the public hearing at the second City Council meeting in December.
All right, thank you, Eric. I'd like to announce that Bunny Tricky Cotton has left for the evening. With that, we still have a quorum with the 5 members that are here tonight. Other business, Eric, updates on prior cases?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. See, I think there's just one thing that was sent to the City Council last month, and that is the Schrader subdivision, a 3-lot subdivision that is out on West Main Street and Industrial Drive. Was approved by the City Council, and I believe one of the properties is already transferred, and so that's good news. The buildings, the 3 buildings, were kind of confined to a single tract of land, and now that they're divided, it looks like one of them is in the process of being used. So the second item there, the South Side Old Munichburg plan, and so that plan went to the City Council, and the law department came to a determination that the zoning code and the way it deals, sends comprehensive plan amendments to the City Council probably needs to be fixed. But they are going to pass a resolution basically recognizing the importance and the work that has been placed into that plan, and scheduled for the November 6th City Council meeting. And so it will get its due recognition, and again, I believe the City Council has been well informed about the contents of that plan, and while the vote on the resolution is not a formal vote on the comprehensive plan amendment, it's certainly a vote of confidence in it. So,
all right, sounds good.
And then item B on the other business list is a city code amendment pertaining to historic preservation review of demolition proposals. It's listed as a discussion item on the agenda. And so this is an item that was forwarded to the Planning and Zoning Commission by the Public Works and Planning Committee. The Public Works and Planning Committee is a subcommittee of the City Council. 5 City Council members sit on it and deal with public works matters and then also planning matters that come up. And so this demolition proposal, a historic preservation review of demolition proposals, is a topic that has been discussed at some length by the Historic Preservation Commission, and they actually had a draft bill go from that body to the Public Works and Planning Committee. I think it received a very large number of comments, and the Public Works and Planning Committee basically directed staff to redraft portions of that bill, which we have done and presented to them. And then at the suggestion of city staff and the law department, recommended forwarding this demolition bill to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Now, the reason for that is its legality is somewhat rooted in the same chapters of state statutes that deal with land use. And so by sending it through the Planning and Zoning Commission public hearing process, it certainly not only allows for public comment on this, largely development-oriented type of proposal, but also legitimizes it through, again, state law that allows for cities to have such authority, some fairly broad authority in terms of regulating, in this case, demolition relating to how old structure is or how historic it might be. So that is why it is coming before you, because its authority is largely derived through the land use sections of and zoning sections of the state statutes. And so I first wanted to give an overview of what it is that staff was tasked with doing, and then also what the current process is with regards to review of demolition proposals. Currently, any building that is greater than 50 years old that is proposed for demolition has to go in front of the Historic Preservation Commission for a review of that proposal. Okay, the Historic Preservation Commission reviews them and can vote to approve them or vote to not approve them, basically. But they do not have the ability to prevent the demolition permit from being issued. really all they have the ability to do is delay it for a period of 60 days, essentially. And so, so it's not a very strong type of language that's in the city code today with regard to, trying to preserve a building that's been identified as being historic, from demolition. And that has been a great concern, amongst the Historic Preservation Commission and other historic-minded people within the community. And so, what the Public Works and Planning Committee, after hearing, quite a number of public comments on this issue, directed staff to do was to set up a tiered system of review. So I have the 3 bullet points up there dealing with the 3 points within that tier. The first point, the building's less than 50 years old with no review process. And so if someone's proposing something for demolition less than 50 years old, they don't have any kind of historic preservation review. Then buildings that are between 50 years and 100 years old, to keep that current process in place. Again, it's largely review in nature. It doesn't grant any authority to actually prevent a demolition permit from being issued, but keeps the current review process in place. And then the third bullet point there, for buildings greater than 100 years old, to establish a new, stronger process wherein the Historic Preservation Commission could actually deny the issuance of a demolition permit and prevent a building from being demolished. So that's what that's what we were tasked to do, and so I believe you were passed out the draft council bill that we have prepared, along with a staff analysis that gives a description. I think it's a fairly lengthy document, so the staff analysis we've tried to really highlight the key points of the process. And so the next couple slides, I'll touch on some of the main items. First is the terms. So with the 3 bullet points there, of course, we're only really dealing with the last 2 bullet points. The existing process for buildings between 50 and 100 years old, and then the stronger new process for buildings over 100 years old. And so we've coined 2 terms listed as items 1 and 2 up on the screen. The first term, historic preservation demolition review, meaning the review process that is applicable to those structures between 50 and 100 years old, also to local landmarks and properties that are located in National Register districts. Okay, and then the second term, historic preservation demolition clearance. Okay, and this is referring to the stronger process that a property owner must be approved for in order to demolish a building that is older than 100 years old, and also any buildings that are located within local historic districts. I'll digress here for a moment. There's a difference between a National Register district, what people commonly think of as a historic district, and a local historic district. There are several National Register districts in town. Capitol Avenue is a National Register district. There's portions of Old Munichburg that are National Register, so downtown. Also out on Clark and or Morrow Drive is a National Register district. So there's several of those located within the community. There are no local historic districts, none. There's some language within the city code that allows for designation of local historic districts, but none have been designated. So, but could be designated in the future, and so that's why that bullet point item is included in there. So in the event there are future local historic districts, this second, stronger clearance process would apply. So the review process, the first of those, again, it's review only. It's has a review time built within the code, either 2 meetings or 75 days, whichever is less. And we received some comments at Public Works and Planning that the time periods, especially compared with the other process, the process for clearance, might be a little confusing, and so we might need to put a little bit more thought into that. The third bullet point there, denial results in demolition permit only being delayed until that review time has passed. And then the fourth item there is that there's no public hearing or any kind of notification associated with that process. And the only reason I put that bullet point in there is to differentiate it from the clearance process where there is. So the next slide is the slide dealing with the stronger new process where approval or denial of that clearance would prevent a demolition permit from being issued. And that there is a public hearing associated with it. So the Historic Preservation Commission would have to have public hearing requirements inserted into their normal meeting. Very similar to this body is really where that public hearing language was drafted, and it's contained. I believe it's toward the end of the draft council bill. Very regimented kind of public hearing process for how these would be presented in front of the Historic Preservation Commission. Again, very similar to what you are used to here at this body. The timeline would be the same, essentially, as planning and zoning matters, where a case gets presented to you. You have certain abilities to table it over for 1 month for cause. The applicant has the ability to request a continuance for 1 month, but there is that time period where those applications must be dealt with. And then denials by the Historic Preservation Commission could be appealed to the City Council with that same public hearing process in front of that body. And so if someone's proposing to demolish something that's over 100 years old, they would make application, go in front of the Historic Preservation Commission in a public hearing format. That commission would look at a series of review criteria, and so that's the next slide here. And so we tried to set up kind of a tiered structure of that review criteria. And so the review criteria is important because there has to be a method written down as to how these cases are going to be looked at by the Historic Preservation Commission. So the review criteria was drafted largely off of what already exists within, for National Register nominations. What, the criteria that's used to establish a National Register district. It's kind of a standard for what makes something historic. Okay. And then, so that's the first bullet point there. And so that criteria is actually listed within the bill. So you can read through what that is. And then the second bullet point is criteria relating to the visual impact on streetscapes or other historic properties. So if there's a building that is, again, over 100 years old, located on a street where its removal would have a large effect on the visual effect on that street, that is an item that the Historic Preservation Commission could consider when ruling on this. So those first two bullet point items are historic in nature. So their review criteria built around determining if a structure is what, again, coining a new term, a notable structure, basically a historic structure, but we use the term notable structure. And so if it is a notable structure, if they have found it to be notable because of that criteria, then there's this other list of items that they must consider. And that is the deterioration of the structure, what kind of shape it's in. If it's in very bad condition, unlivable, unfixable, then that is a relevant item for consideration. Whether it's located within a redevelopment area. Okay, that's an item that's typically talked about in front of the Planning and Zoning Commission, but it is relevant if it is a building located within an area targeted by city plans as being, intended for redevelopment. And the third item, the nature of the surrounding use. And so the example I might use here is if it's the last residential building on a street that's full of buildings that are commercial, that is a relevant item for consideration. That are built in a different manner. Okay, and then the fourth item, existence of similar structures within the city. One of the criteria is the number of other examples of that structure within the city. And so if it's a type of building that is prevalent throughout the city, that is sometimes an item for consideration. And then the last item, there are plans for preservation of fixtures and elements. So this is an item that is amongst the Historic Preservation Commission has been an item of concern is if a building is going to be demolished, but there are various fixtures or architectural elements that are notable, are they going to be preserved is basically the question there, and what are the plans for doing that? And so they can take that into consideration as well. A few other items contained in the bill, establishing some application fees. The length of approval for this process would be 1 year. So this historic preservation review or clearance is actually being separated from the demolition permit process. So a person can apply for it prior to applying for demolition permit. Very similar as to if they were planning to build a building, they would apply for zoning before they go through the process of developing their building plans. Okay, so they could get their clearance from historic preservation before, for example, transferring the property to a different owner who plans on demolishing it, and that's an important item in there. And then conditions on approval. There would be the ability for the Historic Preservation Commission to place conditions on approval of a demolition or of this clearance. And then the property owner could appeal any of those conditions in the same manner as they could appeal an outright denial to the City Council. That's my description. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I know it's a very big topic. That's why we bring these to you a month in advance, so you have some time to think about it. Certainly, if nothing comes to mind tonight, certainly you could give me a call at any time and do my best to answer any questions you have. Anytime, Dale. I know you stay up late. I know I'm safe at about 8 o'clock in the morning.
All right. Is there any questions for city staff at this point from the commissioners? Eric, thanks for the description of that. I'm sure that the commission members will peruse the packet you've given us and maybe come up with some questions, as well as we want to let anyone that's watching tonight or any of the constituents in Jeff City know that they can reach out to the Planning and Protective Services Department as well, correct?
That is correct. I'd certainly be happy to talk to anyone who has any questions on this. The one item of correspondence that was given to you tonight is from the Board of Realtors dealing with this topic, and so they have been very involved with it through its entire course of going in front of the Public Works and Planning Committee, and so they've reviewed it quite thoroughly, and we do expect more comments from other members of the community, and expect to consolidate that into a packet of correspondence for you, and so certainly it along with any questions that anyone has, we are actively seeking comments, in favor, opposed to, or ways to make it better. From any member of the community that has an interest in this.
I'm assuming the next time it will come before this body will be a public hearing. It is not something that's just localized to a single piece of property. How do you all get the word out, if you want to say, to folks in the community? And this is more, well, maybe I shouldn't say that. I mean, you'd think it would be more geared toward the historic areas, but even people that live in brand new homes still have concerns about these things. So is there anything that the city does to try to promote the interaction with the constituents on something that's so broad?
We do have email lists that this topic has been sent out to, and I believe has been sent out recently as well, and laying out the timeline on how it is proceeding through city government. It was presented to the Historic Preservation Commission just on Tuesday evening, and so many of the people who have expressed an interest in this topic are already contained on those email lists, and so receive those notices. And it is a topic that's received a fair amount of press and is located on the website. And so hopefully the combination of all that will get the word out for anyone who's seeking information on it.
Awesome. Thank you. Do any other commission members have any questions for city staff? If not, we'll move on to our next item. All right. Alex, I know you mentioned before the meeting started you had a quick comment for us.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll make this very quick. So we have the planning division within the city in Planning and Protective Services has two parts: the current planning, which we're doing this evening, and the long-range transportation planning of Campo. I know I've come here and discussed some things, and so has our other planner, Katrina Williams, based on the pedestrian bicycle plan, for example, is something that we produced and brought to this commission in the past. We have two upcoming public meetings in the next 2 weeks. So, and they're both on Tuesdays, so it's kind of easy to remember. The first one is on the 17th of October. The Capital Area Metropolitan Planning Organization, or CAMPO, contracted with a consultant to do a system-wide system-wide analysis of the transit system here in the city of Jefferson. And this public meeting that's going to be taking place from 3 to 6 in the small conference room, the Boone Bancroft room across the hall from where we're sitting right now, is going to be having a meeting discussing changes to various routes for the JeffTran system, the transit agency here in Jefferson City. I think you would all find it very interesting, and I hope that you will consider attending. The second meeting we're having is 1 week after this meeting, so it'll be on October the 24th. And again, Campo has been working on a plan that's been looking for needs and gaps in service for public transportation and members of the community and of our region. So we've been working with human service agencies and various transportation agencies like OATS and JeffTran, and we've been meeting with some stakeholders, and so we've got a draft plan, and part of what's required for that plan is that we not only do we find the gaps in service that are required for our citizenry, but also we draft up some strategies to try to fix those gaps in service. And while those are very big areas of concern that won't be solved overnight, we've worked towards coming up with some strategies to kind of begin that process of trying to alleviate some of those gaps in service. And so what we're asking the public to do is to come and look at the strategies, and part of what's required by federal statute is that they prioritize those, to help us prioritize those. So on the 17th, we're having one on transit and looking at the system, the whole system as a whole, and possible changes to that. And the week following that, we're looking at the kind of gaps in service that the whole area has for transit and public transportation in general. So I'd like to encourage you to make it if you can. They're both similar, but also very dissimilar in terms of what we're doing. So I just wanted to make that invitation.
Thank you. Both those meetings will be across the hall from 3 to 6?
That's correct. Same room and the same times on both meetings, 3 to 6. So, that's during the times when transit is in service, and it also runs, so if someone works kind of an odd schedule, they might have an opportunity still to come and comment. So,
well, appreciate you doing that. All right. With that being said, is there any other business we have this evening? The commission members have anything? Seeing none, we will declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight.